On June 1st, the Indian state makes the first attack. The Border Security Force, the CRPF, the Central Reserve Police Force, under orders of the army, they start firing into the Darbar Sahib complex. And this is unprovoked firing that they do. And they do it in order to test where the Sikh battle positions are. So they start firing into the complex like Shariam, like not at a target, just into the complex, and they fire into the Sangat, and 8 people are killed, 8 civilians of the Sangat that aren't like part of, this thing. And the Sikh soldiers are under strict orders to not respond to the fire from the Indian side unless their position, their morcha, like the fortified position that they're in, unless that position's directly under fire, then you can respond. And so on 1st of June, Bhai Mehnga Singh, Bhai Kulwant Singh Babbar, Bhai Mehnga Singh, they, from Baba Atal Rai, they return fire at an Indian government position, and then in that exchange of fire, they attain Shaheedi, and they become the first Shaheed of the battle that's going to unfold over the next 10 days.
One thing's inspiring as well is like as the troops had gathered and like they were bringing all these troops in, we were as well. And there's one Sakhi when Santji goes to Hazur Sahib, he meets a Jatha of Singhs that were doing Kar Seva, and because they're doing Kar Seva, they were quite like muscular, quite built, and Santi says to them that like, you've built quite impressive physiques, are these ever going to come in service of the Panth? And their Jatha said that Santi goes, Yaad karo, remember us when you need it. He goes, Asi tode aage to ho ke shaheediyan pawage.
So Kar Seva Baba Shisha Singh Ji Jatha.
Imagine how this kind of like would have felt, the atmosphere that in December 83 there's Jatha of 40 Singhs that no one's ever seen before, no one knows. The Jatha of 40 Singhs comes down, and their specific thing is Asi te jugujna te shaheediyan pawaniyan.
Some of the Singhs express some paranoia because they don't know who they are, and they've come with like old kind of rifles and shotguns. They've come with that, and they're saying naal saath dena hai asi, so when they kind of tell Santaji this is their position, like what should we do in it, because they could be anyone. This was a little bit element of paranoia, and Santaji goes nahi saade naal shaheedi pauna hai inna nu vadiya to vadiya hatiyar do.
I remember speaking to one of the Singhs who said that when they came, they just gave out whatever shastra they had, they shared them. And I said, like, so you just gave whatever other weapons you guys had to these 40 Singhs you never met before? And he goes, if you'd saw them, he goes, you would have given them too. He goes, they just spoke to each other in like Gurbani and stuff. They were just at Simran the whole time, that they literally had come there, and their sole mission was that they Juj Kashid.
And I think that's worth mentioning here. Is Kar Seva Baba Shisha Singh Ji, there's Kar Seva Khadur Sahib, Una de vi Singh aaye. There's a few Kar Seva Sants, Una de Singh aaye. And of course we know that the Kar Seva Sants helped also when hun jadon tiyari karan waste, their trucks would get in and out from on the Kar Seva jitte gaddiyan te likhiya hunda hai. So there is a lot of people at play here already. I know it's not just Santaji and the Jathebandiya that we know about already. Other people are now entering this space.
Bhai Mehnga Singh, we need to kind of dwell into his Jeevan a bit. Maharaj has given him the honor to being the first Shaheed of this Hamla, and he's not just a normal Singh. He's the one who actually did some Sangat with Bhai Fauja Singh, but then he attained Amrit after the Fauja Singh got Shaheed. So he basically ran towards Amritsar once he knew this has happened, and he took Amrit 79. And after that he was along with the Babbar Singhs with that whole lot, and when he got shot, I think Bhai Manmohan Singh was with him. Bhai Manmohan Singh said, ki hoya theek hai? Kanda chaddi kala, goli lag chuki hai. And he goes, chaddi kala. And I think he recited the whole Sukhuni Sahib. When we talked about Murda hoye murid soye ko urla gur gor samawe, he had the blessing of Guru that he was one of the Singhs actually cremated in the Darbar Sahib after, like I think it was after 100 years or something. So it's one of those things that all these Singhs, they played a part, and then Bhai Mehnga Singh became one of the very inspiring figures for the rest of the Babbar Singhs.
Of course.
The Sathi Singhs of Bhai Mehnga Singh, they say that Bhai Mehnga Singh like had this like real deep desire for like Shaheedi, and every time they would do Ardas, like their Ardas would be really emotional and would reflect that emotion, that desire that they had for Shaheedi. Like Pera de Pabba de utte karke like Ardas karde hunde sige ki Maharaj kai no bahut sama ho gaya, kado Shaheedi da sama auna hai, like they ona nu cha siga. And you see that like throughout all of the Sikhs that are fighting in Darbar Sahib, they're fighting, the Singhs that are fighting, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਚਾਅ ਆ ਸ਼ਹਾਦਤ ਦਾ, ਲਾਈਕ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਉਹ ਮੌਤ ਨੂੰ ਵਿਆਉਣ ਚੱਲੇ ਆ, ਲਾਈਕ all of that ਇਤਿਹਾਸ of the Gur ਇਤਿਹਾਸ period of everything up before then, that ਉਹ ਫੇਰ ਦੁਹਰਾਇਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ. You see it like being repeated in that moment, in the character and the way in which Sikhs are fighting and what they're fighting for. And on the other hand, you have the Indian state whose violence, because ਉਹਨਾਂ ਕੋਲ ਵੀ ਹਥਿਆਰ ਹੈ, ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਕੋਲ ਵੀ ਹਥਿਆਰ ਹੈ, right? The Indian state using their ਹਥਿਆਰ, whether it's physical weaponry or like political thing, their violence looks like stripping women naked, arrested, cutting Singh's case off, spitting tamakku in their mouths, torturing people, killing them in encounters, firing into the Sangat. And Singhada violence looks like a targeted assassination of a senior police officer who's responsible, another assassination of another, political figure who's responsible. There's a massive difference in the character and the nature of Sikh conflict versus the Indian state. And we're going to see that all play out in Darbar Sahib. On the 2nd of June, which is Guru Arjan Dev Ji Shaheedi Purab, 10,000 soldiers surrounding Darbar Sahib, like Amritsar, and there's all like military checkpoints everywhere, everything's locked off. That cordon is suddenly opened and Sangat's allowed to filter into Darbar Sahib on the Shaheedi Purab. Bhai Mehnga Singh's Antam Sanskar happens in Darbar Sahib in the Parakrama, and then on that day General Bra says that we'll see to it that they are on their knees in 2 hours. So that's that kind of attitude that they're going in with. And at the same time, the telephone, electricity, water connections are cut off in Darbar Sahib. The government essentially cuts off the entire Punjab state to the outside world. There's no like transport, there's like no media, all of that's fully restricted. And then Indira Gandhi makes an appeal on national TV, and she says, I appeal, don't shed blood, shed hatred. In what she's doing there is playing Jankiya Niti. So in that equation, we are the violent people that are, spilling blood for no reason. And she is the calm person who's appealing for peace, knowing full well they had been preparing for a year, commando raids, they'd sealed all of Darbar Sahib, they're bringing in soldiers from outside. Later on, they would give these soldiers rewards for participating in this so-called operation.
So they've just fired indiscriminately into Darbar Sahib.
But she knows that it's been,
and we're shedding blood.
But she knows it's like a full media blackout, so no one would have known what was happening at that time.
There were trains being brought in. The Guru Arjan Dev Ji Shaheedi
Sangat that was there was allowed to come into Darbar Sahib.
On
so
purpose,
because again, they wanted this to be a punishing, crushing, demoralizing defeat for the Sikhs. They wanted to inflict atrocities and violence in order to punish us, because that's the purpose of the state's violence, is to remind you who's in charge. And asi tak inni mande asi puja akal ki parcha shabad ka didar khalse ka. So they wanted to remind us the state's in charge, that you have no nata with Akal Purkh. Akal Purkh doesn't come into this relationship कि तुसी साडे नागरिक हैं, and because you are citizens, we're going to treat you the way we see fit. So if we want to destroy your bodies, if you want to burn your Gur Asthaan, if we want to make insightful speeches and incite these right-wing fascist Hindu organizations to carry out the unofficial work of the state, उन्होंने ne karna hai. On the 3rd of June, the Khalsa's Morchebandi at this point, they're in the elevated positions around the Parakrama, Sant Janel Singh. So the military commander of Khalsa Fauj is General Shabig Singh, and they lead the defense of Akal Takht Sahib. So they knew at that point the main attack is going to be coming. That was just like them testing. And all their fortifications were in all of the strategic locations as mentioned, including like Akal Takht Sahib, Darshani Diori, which is the entrance into Darbar Sahib, around the Parakrama, Ramgariya Bunga, water tank, Guru Ramdas Sarai, Teja Singh Samundari Hall. They've got vantage points, they've got their own communication lines, they've got rations, food, etc. stored up, they've got ammunition stored up. And so
just a little point at this point as well, to dispel this myth about this being like a place of worship, but for Sikhs, as Shamsher was talking about earlier, it's like it's also a killer. Part of the reason why, as we'll talk about later, that why the army struggled so much and why they had such a huge casualty rate was because the Darbar Sahib was built with that in mind. Like the Ramgariya Bunga, like the army talks about this and they say, oh, why don't you try like a surprise action and try to like catch them off guard? And they're like, because you could see us from miles off, innit? They've got watchtowers. Like the Ramgariya Bunga were made for that particular reason. And like even the narrow lanes that used to come up, I think they widened them now, but before there were narrow lanes that came up to Darbar Sahib. So from when the Darbar Sahib was built, it was built so that you'd see the occupying force coming. And that's another problem that they had, that when the forces were trying to get to even Darbar Sahib, they were getting picked off.
That's basically the architecture.
The
it's being built, and that's on the Sikh side, the Khalsa side. But on the other side, the Indian Army, was it just the Indian Army? I've heard about like SAS involvement, British.
So the SAS was giving them training in order to carry out commando raids, and they were doing that because the British government wanted to sell them helicopters, military helicopters. They wanted to secure a trade deal on military hardware. And even before that, like Britain, and even after that, Britain has been a major supplier to India for military hardware, knowing what they use it for, the mass human rights atrocities that they carry out. They also received help from like the Israeli Mossad in order to carry out these kind of attacks. And it wasn't just the military, as the border security force, the Central Reserve Police Force, multiple branches of the Indian state state's security forces that were coming in. They had armored personnel carriers, they had tanks, the Vijantia, like main battle tanks that they were brought in. The battle tanks, you got to understand, they come in because they weren't able to win a ground conflict. They weren't able to gain any ground into the Darbar Sahib. They were sending soldiers in. So what happens on the 3rd is General Subeg Singh gives the order to the Sikhs to open fire. He's in the Parkarma and he fires he's got a Sten gun, he fires a burst of his gun from the Parkarma, and that's the signal to the Singhs, like, apniya banduka khol do, and now begin the
in response
the phase,
to artillery.
Begin the phase of the jung. Immediately on the 3rd of June, the Indian army, they take heavy losses. They're unable to gain in any ground into Darbar Sahib. They're coming from multiple entrances. They call in for reinforcements. Their soldiers are like, some of them are deserting. Their helicopter gunships come in to drop elite troops and like commandos. They're met with fierce resistance, which prevents any of those troops from landing. All of those helicopters, troops are eliminated. And at this point, 3rd of June, the battle's gone way further than the Indians were anticipating, that they didn't know that the battle was going to go to this point now. It's like the Heru encounter exploded, and they find like Sikh resistance at this point overwhelming.
And one of their generals talks about it being a killing field in front of Atal Takht. So essentially they're getting drawn into the the bit in front of Atal Takht Sahib Darshani Diodi.
The courtyard,
that part, they're being drawn in.
At this point, they haven't had darshan of Atal Takht yet. They're still trying to come into like the complex, and they're worried as well. At the same time, they're worried about like a revolt from like other Sikh soldiers. They're worried about like more Sikhs coming from Punjab to Darbar Sahib. So they're worried that they're surrounded. Darbar Sahib and Amritsar, they're worried that they're going to get surrounded by like villages and people coming from towns and cities. All the bus rail, like all of this, the road checkpoints and the blockades are put in place. The border with Gurdaspur is sealed. The border with like Pakistan is fully sealed. With Kashmir, like it's much larger than immediately Darbar Sahib. The media blackout like intensifies to prevent any kind of information getting out at this point. On the 4th of June, Amrit Vela Hundaya, like 3:30 in the morning, Sangat Sukhmani Sahib kar rahe hai. So at about 4 o'clock, the army suddenly begin bombing Darbar Sahib using artillery because they're unable to gain ground with the soldiers. You have helicopters circling, they're starting firing from the helicopters. The helicopters are using like, lights to like guide in their soldiers.
What's interesting as well is that at the same time, like the Maryada doesn't stop. The thing is still reading Asa Diwar. And at this time, when the Torps fire, General Subeg Singh is coming back from Darbar Sahib after doing Palki Seva, they still continue. And they're talking about the helicopter gunships is like a famous Sakhi of how they're trying to like deliver troops and stuff. And Bhai Mehnga Singh takes the SLR and stops that advance from happening as well.
So you have like 7 divisions of the Indian army deployed at this point through all 3 branches, the army, the navy, the air force, and they're under immense political pressure now as well, because this is on June 4th now. Remember, like at the start, the general in charge of it saying that this is going to be over in 2 hours, that they're going to be on their knees. So like 4 days later now, like there's intense firing. They're losing like a massive number of soldiers. General Subeg Singh had set up firing positions that were like a few inches off the ground in order to wound the Indian soldiers and then wait for other soldiers to come and pick, because he knew like the protocols of the Indian army. He was like, shoot to wound them, and then 2-3 more are going to come to take that soldier, and then get all of them together. So their like casualties were piling up massively, and they weren't kind of prepared. There's a video of an Indian army lieutenant, and he says when we kind of come in under one of the entrances to get into the Parkarma, he's like, we're being fired from above, underneath, from behind, and he's like, we're being fired at from all angles, and we don't know where these positions are. We can't see anything. Like there's like all this tua, etc. And he's like, they haven't prepared us for this. They haven't given us this type of training to kind of meet this type of fortifications. So that's when they start like under like political pressure, under obviously the growing threat of revolt from like Punjab. Indian forces start using heavy artillery. They're requesting support for main battle tanks. At this point now they've got like about 15,000 soldiers for this main assault. They've got heavy weapons. They've got additional 35,000 soldiers in reserve, and the Khalsa Fauj at this point is like less than 300. Water supply has been cut off, and like they're thriving off like punne hoye sholle and like Guru's kirpa and the ardasa.
I always find this bit quite astounding, is that like Shamsher Singh was saying that they had like unlimited resources, so like their battalions and they've got like infantry regiments, and they're getting replenished time and time again. They're coming, there's wave after wave of attack is getting met. And the crazy thing is that whether you look at like the Babbar Khalsa Singhs, the Guru Nanak Nawaz, Ona di Morcha Bandi si at the water tanki,
tank morcha,
and the crazy thing is,
Singh,
but when they did the Morcha Bandi was 2 Singhs. Like each morcha,
Yeah.
like one of the do Singh sige. And the difference was, it's not necessarily just tactical. Like General Shaheed Singh was definitely tactically amazing, and like, you know, and the infrastructure of Darbar Sahib had been created in that sense, where there's tunnels and all sorts of things for the same reason. But it's also about like the bravery of the fighters, because they had been told, like, imagine Santi or someone had told them, like one of the Jathadar, whichever group it was, I said that this is your morcha, you're not leaving it unless they walk over your chest in it. So that's the difference. Towards the end of 4th of June as well, like there's this Dr. Bhagwan Singh, he's a Sikh Student Federation leader, and he's still alive today, and he was talking about the attack, and he clearly wasn't of the same kind of caliber of these other Guru Sikhs, because he was saying that when the battle started, General Shaheed Singh had said early on the 4th that this is the perfect place to give Shaheedi as a soldier, because it has a place connected to your dharam and your ancestry and your people. And he goes, that's when I realized that he was ready to die and I wasn't. He's a PhD student, so he's like studied like Sikh history in depth, and what he was saying was that what we couldn't believe was happening is what we've been reading about was happening before our eyes. Because when they got to Atal Tak on the 4th of June, he goes, Sanchi was handing out do tare khande and was saying to the Singhs, Singho je asla mukega de khanda kharka deo, kisi ne haath nahi kare. And he goes, I'm standing there thinking like, I can't believe what I'm watching. This is the kind of history that we've read about, and it's happening in front of our eyes.
Just like the mahal from like the Singhs that were inside the Darbar Sahib, they're talking about like Sant Janel Singh's older brother putting on a brand new chola, new kamar kasa, new dastar, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਚਾਹ ਸੀਗਾ, like, you know, ਕਿ ਉਹ ਵਿਆਹ ਤੇ ਚੱਲੇ ਆ, like ਮੌਤ ਨੂੰ ਵਿਆਹਣ ਚੱਲੇ, they're going to marry death. You had other Singhs that were writing their names and they're putting them inside the golak in Darbar Sahib so that, you know, Sikhs in future generations would know who fought here. The environment was one of like Chardi Kala, that we are going to meet the Indian army like kind of head on.
So Baba Gurbakh Singh Ji, before, like when I think it was the Afghan forces were going to attack Darbar Sahib, they had permission to stay behind with their 30 Singhs, and those 30 Singhs, they all got dressed up in like, you know, wedding clothes and like all their best busted and stuff, name gatre, because they seen them more than all same jada itihas Singha ne daraya. See that the same way Shamsher was talking about that, like Sanchi put on a new like chola, the star.
Yeah, by Arjan Singh Mukta like puts a balti on his head, steel balti, because he was like, when the bullets come, like tilka jaugiyan, like they'll deflect off the balti, and he basically didn't want his chehra to become bepashan. He didn't want to become unrecognizable from his face, because he wanted people to know that Arjan Singh Mukta aithe ladke shaheed hoya siga. So like that kind of spirit. So on like June 5th, the Indian military is starting to bring in like heavy artillery, and like by the evening, the Indian army's like larger plan is set into motion, and Gurdwara across Punjab, up to 74 Gurdwara now that we know. A few years ago when we kind of started looking into this Ityas, we kind of knew about 38 Gurdwara, but now like things that have done research into this of like a list of like 74 Gurdwara.
As far as like Gurdwara Dukh Nivaran Sahib.
Diyala, Ropar, Chonk, Mehta, Faridkot, Muksar Sahib, Mogga, and they were attacked away from Darbar Sahib, and that's because there were strongholds for Panthic organizing, and again like the role of the Gurdwara has always been that. It's always been a kender ke jithe Sikh ikkathe hunde and they organize, they think about their future, they deliberate on these issues.
Just to highlight that point, you're saying at the same time of June 984, at least today's current count, 74 other Gurdwara were attacked at the same time.
Yeah, including Baba Gurbachan Singh Soni pinned, like pins of like main Singhs, like tanks were sent at some of these Gurdwara as well, full on like assaults.
The uprising it's bigger than Santi now, right? Because the Sangat is already like they knew.
They accelerated their plan almost, because by June 5th now, we were 5 days into an operation that they thought that was going to last like 2 hours, and they're meeting like massive like resistance. They're suffering a huge number of casualties. They're not even able to get into the Parkarma. Like 5 days, they're not able to gain ground and build a position within the Parkarma. Anytime they come close, they're met with fire from below, from above, from like different vantage points. And like there's underground passages around the Parkarma, fortified positions are used really effectively, and the fighting continues like all the way into the night. I think General Subeg Singh becomes Shaheed on the 5th of June as well at the evening. Their bodies taken to Sant Janel Singh, and then, you know, they say to Sant Janel Singh that they collect the bachan pure kar gaya, like Shaheed bhi ho gaya, and I didn't leave my weapon on the battlefield. I died.
He
like
brought
with
the gun back.
Yeah, he brought his gun back. He's like, I died with my shastar in my hand. Early into like the 6th of June, the battle's intensity increases, but yet Indian forces, they're unable to penetrate the defenses of Sri Akal Takht Sahib. They're getting closer.
Things are coming lower from like the vantage points. The water has been taken out, the bungia are getting shelled, so the Singhs are now like regrouping, getting closer and closer. Especially the Jede Karaseva Wale Singh, the Federation Singhs like Bhai Mehnga Singh, they're like holy, like getting consolidating. One of the Singhs was saying that like we were fighting and our hearts had become stone, because like Sade Singh, Sade Sam, Nature Dashid, obviously, and they were just Shaheed next to us, like lying. And even like the army talked about it, and they said that like when they finally got in, jumping ahead a bit, but when they finally got into Atal Takht, they said the shells were knee deep, and they said that there's no battle where you've ever fought where you could fight like that, like how a small number of people can fight like that. It's just beyond.
And it's like the month of June, one of the hottest months, and you're firing like, you know, machine guns and like, you know, the heat that they're producing, and you're firing non-stop. Afterwards, like the Indian military guys, they couldn't work out how 126 were able to fire that number of bullets from that position, because that requires skill and training, like loading weapons, and in order to continue like that sustained rate of fire, basically they couldn't understand like and now on the early hours of 6 June you have like armored personnel carriers, which are like vehicles that allow soldiers to get in closer. They're brought in directly into the Parakarma in order for them to like kind of advance their assault, and they go around like Baba Deep Singh Shaheedi Memorial, and the Sikhs fire an RPG at that armored personnel carrier. And it wasn't like a commercial RPG, this is like a thing that they had made, because within Darbar Sahib they had a factory for making like explosives and stuff. They had fired a rocket at that armored personnel carrier and exploded it. And you could hear like obviously things doing Jagare like on the 6th of June. And then the Indian military sends in highly trained paramilitary troops and other like, you know, battalions in order to get close to Atal Takht Sahib, and even those waves of like commandos are like decimated, unable to kind of gain ground, unable to like defeat those mortar positions. This is when they bring in the tanks to essentially blow up the whole battlefield. They couldn't secure, they see like, oh, firing's coming from that building. It's not like, oh, now soldiers versus soldiers. Now they just like fire a tank shell at that, blow that up. And that's how they were finally able to gain control. And the shells that they use, they're called high explosive squash head shells. They're designed to be used against fortified targets. So they go through the wall and they penetrate the wall and they explode inside. Highly effective munitions that they're using.
Approximately 70 to 80 shells were used
at Atal Takht alone. And that's from Jagjit Arora, who's like an Indian military guy. He looks at like Atal Takht afterwards, and he's like, he thinks around like 80 high explosive shells are fired. And talking about the architecture, the first kind of shells they were firing at the Gummat of Atal Takht were bouncing off Gyani Moor Singh as in a morcha underneath one of the Gummats, and in one of those Gummats is like Pratan Sroops and stuff that were stored there. A shell hits that Gummat and it catches fire, and then he leaves that morcha, swims through the Sarovar, goes to Santji and says, oh, like they've hit a round there and the Gummat's on fire now. And Santji's angry at him. He's like, why did you leave your like position, go back to your position? But just like how strict they were and like their discipline on the battlefield. And the whole Parwar, Gyani Moor Singh, their Singhni, Bibi Satnam Kaur, Bibi Waiguru Kaur, their bachche become Shaheed during their attempt to destroy an Indian army tank. On like the 6th of June, Sant Janel Singh, towards the evening, the fighting's going really late at night. Jere Atal Takht de vich Singh Sage, like the last kind of defenders, because now the fighting had come close, the tanks had come to Atal Takht right in front of it. The Sarovar and everything's all lal and like it's all like blood everywhere. At that moment, like they make their final stand essentially. The Atal Takht is damaged. Sant Janel Singh Huni and like the things go up and they do ardas in front of the Shastran di Palki, and they do ardas to Guru Har Gobind Pasha, and they say that Jado tak Sikh da Azad Kar Khalistan nahi banda main war janam lama. And like at the same time, like the Singhs firing with their machine guns from Atal Takht while they're doing their ardas. So ardas karke wo fir bahar nikalde hain under the lower level of Atal Takht. Tank fires at them, wo fir utthe sare shaheed ho jande hain.
Santji did give that message to the other Singhs, especially the Sukhdev Singh Babbar and the other Singh Anok Singh Babbar who were still alive. He said that ki kise nu eh ladai mud ke jari rakhni paini. You need to go ahead and carry on the sangharsh. There was a langar seva going on. Ranjit Singh Babbar was walking through the tunnels giving langar. Bhai Mehnga Singh Ji Babbar was escorting some sangat out slowly and steadily through the back door ki tusi bach ke nikal jo, hai na, because they're going to eventually kill everyone, saying ki asi maximum casualty chahne hain. And the choice of that day as well, Gurpurab.
As maximum casualty, but also imagine how difficult that would have been, because Bhai Mehnga Singh Ji's like ferrying out Sangata whilst also trying to fight. We would obviously discriminate between obviously the Sangata and the army, but the army's not doing that, so it was just added difficulty.
The Singh's order is to fight until like their last bullet, and until that fighting and that mortar is not sustainable. Some of the Singhs that leave the battlefield after that point, they leave with that intention, doing ardas ke asi itte shaheed ho gaye hain, tell our parwar that we're never going to go back to our homes now, that asi mar gaye hain itte, now we've become shaheed with the rest of the Sikhs.